take. Yeah, so I'm Giuliano Yajima. Oh, okay. Okay. So I'm Giuliano Yajima from the Institute of College. So this is the title of my presentation. So originally, my presentation was supposed to be a more kind of a comprehensive thing, sort of including presenting a recent paper we developed with those co-authors, and then discussing some of the sort of data limitation for building a sort of a distributional stock-flow sort of consistent model. But then in the end, it was going to be mostly tutored, sort of presenting the paper and then pointing out some of those things that were already covered by the wonderful presentation of Mark Morgan yesterday. So this is sort of the plan of the talk. And yeah, you can scan this fancy little QR code to download the paper. So the idea, the idea is sort of for the paper that we developed with those co-authors was to sort of integrate the debt-driven and autonomous consumption in a sort of empirically calibrated SFC stock super multiplier model, leveraging the data for income consumption, wealth and income composition, wealth and consumption for each US income quantile. So you have the sort of the idea of this James-like phase of the household debt, the fact that borrowing does increase consumption and you also lose aggregate demand, but over time you have to build up of that stock, and then which put downward pressure to sort of wealth of the private sector, and finally sort of demand. And one of the key mechanisms that we have in our model is the so-called hypothesis of the consumption cascading, driving both demand and the distributional pattern. Then at the very end of the presentation, I also point out some of the limitation to sort of build up or integrating fully sort of distribution data in reconstructing sort of the accounting for each quintile or insights. So I don't think I have to. Well, maybe I'll just focus on this slide, which is sort of does show does complete. And I think maybe that one will be. Yeah, I think this one is better. So here, so very well-known stylized fact, the idea of having sort of increase here sort of measure as the so-called sort of a pseudo actually Palma ratio, so that is the sort of the higher quantile against the other sort of the other quantile of distribution for both income and consumption. And you do see that there is a clear tendency towards increase in inequality in terms of income measure and disposable income, but in terms of consumption per quintile, this sort of index has remained somehow stable. So meaning that in the end that the consumption pattern has remained stable for those sort of for all quintile of the US. And this is explained by the maximum increase of the debt to income ratios. So, the literature has come up with several hypotheses sort of explaining the sort of non-induced component of consumption, and that's some of them are really well known. The idea of sort of expenditure cascaded or trickle down sort of consumption, or most the kind of Weberian sort of framework of consumption norms that sort of that has been pointed out in the literature. So I'm trying to sort of going past it for this part, because again, it's really presenting some of the well-known sort of stylized facts. And then the literature, especially the FFT literature, has covered those topics, either in sort of theoretical models or in more sort of extended model in terms of integrating different institutional sector of the economy, or having sort of fully empirical sort of model, or having borrowed also to this the sort of evolutionary agenda perspective, and and also very recently several contributions using this more kind of super multiplier framework, try to sort of explore the stability condition of debt-driven demand, and more sort of super multiplier sort of dynamics. As for memory itself, so we really had very good, the structure, as you can see, is really close to the one, sort of presented, first idea by Mark. The only real difference is the absence of, the idea, there are actually very different, because, here we are not going into this sort of the three sectoral balance story. This is really an extension of the chapter 8 of Togliawa, which so the only real difference here is the composition of household in sort of one type of input, which will both receive different kind of compensation terms and then profits, and each of them will have some sort of financial sort of rent and financial rent or in. And you have an aggregated sort of non-financial sectors and so, again, it's a really sort of simplified sort of framework. And obviously, you start with the sort of the standard sort of accounting identity for this sort of framework. And the household block, again, it's really laying out what you have seen in the transaction flow matrix. So again, for each sort of the assumption you have also for each quantile that consumption demand is driven by disposable income, the accumulation of the accumulated stock of wealth, and an autonomous component, which will play an important role, as I will explain later on. And if consumption exceeds disposable income, the difference is basically financing the loans. And whereas if it does exceed consumption, then they will accumulate. And obviously we have the network is being the difference between deposit and liabilities. Firms, the block really follows this kind of, so again, firm profit are the sum of inflow from household consumption and investment minus sort of wages and loan interest payment, and the investment share reacts to the adjustment of capacity utilization towards its normal rate. And in absence of technical progress, as it's in this model, the potential output is given by the stock of capital over the capital output ratio. And profits are split between income to household and distributed sort of profits. And loan accumulation by firms does cover investment of finances by with their earnings. And banks are really just sort of financial intermediaries. So sort of dig deep into this part, but I want to focus on the emulation. So as I did mention, this is kind of the one of the core mechanisms of the model, and it's based on this, the folks who has had a sort of a similar idea with respect to ours. Though the formulation itself is, it's our sort of contribution to be one of our main contribution in this model. So the idea of the emulation of for each quantile, that is, you have this term, the ratio of the consumption of the quantile above each quantile, an effect that is that we decided to scale by beyond disposable income. This is mostly, I mean, I have to say, I mean, for this, because we tried a more standard hypothesis of trying to emulate try to including a term of standard emulation of the sort of gross consumption of the higher quantile of higher quantile, but then the estimation did deliver very inconsistent result. And when I decided to add this sort of scaling term, actually, a parameter were very close to did deliver a very sort of reasonable result, which I will show in a moment. And before talking data strategy, which sort of borrowing, sort of using is leveraging those data from this distributional data that US added in terms of so basically you have the choice between two sets of data, that is the NUPA distributional account and the CIA and the consumption expenditure survey. That from those you can derive sort of this quantile specific data to build the vectors of its YT and C. And as for wealth distribution, we use the distributional financial account to allocate sort of the asset liability levels. Estimation via sort of standard error correction model methodology in line with bulk of the literature. Parameters, so those sort of the estimation that delivers sort of the set of parameters, which in a way is reasonable. And also, again, those I didn't include it here, but we also ran the estimate without this sort of emulation component, and those results were pretty close to this, almost the same. Obviously, the first quintile doesn't have to emulate anything, but then obviously the second, the third, and the fourth and fifth would have this additional explanatory factor. And interestingly, the emulation effect is stronger for kind of the middle and the bottom income sort of and the bottom middle sort of quantile. And it's sort of weaker for the bottom, and statistically insignificant for sort of the bottom high quantile. I don't think. I mean, I think I'll show you briefly, maybe using helping just showcase some of the sort of the result for the scenario one, in which basically we had just a sort of a we simply use the model with this with the standard sort of consumption function for each quantile, and we just give a sort of a boost to the autonomous component of consumption. So this is without so the emulation component is so you have basically a sort of a boost in GDP and disposable income, like this actually, because by design the shock was very small, and so we certain persistent increase, so you are also sort of a persistent effect. And UFA and the bottom quantile does increase borrowing, and which leads to an initial income spike, followed with then a dip and then a sort of a recovery. And the other sort of quantile do see a sort of a marginal improvement, because again it's like it's mostly I did shock only the autonomous component of the the bottom sort of the bottom household, let's say. And in terms of distributional dynamics, you see a drop in the wage share, which does not fully recover due to this rising interest income and the rising financial sort of payments. And you do see, a slight increase of the Gini measure in terms of income, whereas the Gini of wealth doesn't really change. Since all the other quantile, but the bottom one does gain share. So there is a little bit of routine distribution in sort of the quantile that are not shocked by example, that they don't add sort of autonomous consumption. And yeah, I mean, as we could also measure the sort of income factor composition index, which is basically the measure the different the inequality in sources of income. Since here we have the compensation of employee and the financial and sort of real profits, and this sort of suggests that in the long term there is a more equal income composition. That is, I mean, household on aggregate do tend to converge in terms of having more sort of sources of income in their sort of, let's say, portfolio of disposable income, and which is sort of a stylized fact, and then which is kind of the same result we got for in the scenario 2, where we also had this sort of where we included this emulation dynamic, and for this and because of the design of this scenario, we do see some interesting dynamics in terms of I mean, for the first sort of the first top quantile, we do observe a moderate increase in income as that declines. Q3, the middle sort of quantile had debt building up slowly as sort of income like consumption. The result for the bottom middle quantile is somehow puzzling, but not that much in the end, because it is true that you originally had the sort of higher coefficient for the emulation parameter. And as a matter of fact, it does emulate at the beginning, but then it's staying because it does follow also the pattern of Q3 of consumption and disposable income of Q3. And since Q3 will see a decline in the long term, also Q4 they will sort of emulate their decline. And Q5 has as larger, again, as sort of the larger debts increases as consumption sort of fades. And again, we have a similar results in terms of declining of functional income distribution. I have sort of the Gini of income up slightly, and again, sort of a drop in the income composition inequality. Because again, we are now in the system itself, there are more, sort of financial rents. So, I mean, in this sense, there are more sort of income, sort of equality, let's say. You see, I mean, so this is sort of, I mean, in the paper you will find also sort of the summary of the results for all the variables, all those household, and very briefly mentioning some of the sort of ways forward. So this is again sort of a recap of our sort of the data availability for the US. Then, I mean, sort of pointing out, what are, in my opinion, one of the limitations for this economy. I think it was used to sort of recap to report the sort of the table for the integrated macroeconomic accounts for households, starting from the so-called current account. And again, here we don't really have a problem. I mean, we do have a problem maybe for data limitation, especially for NIPA. But if you want to sort of rely on the national account, sort of the one that provides sort of the national account, because I mean they start reporting the data from the early 2000s, whereas the consumption expenditure survey, the micro survey, has data for 90s, the 1980s. So that's why I use the 1980s, because it would then need to sort of build the vector and extend the vector for moving the data coverage. So there, I mean, and annual frequency only. That's one of main limitation in terms of the frequency of data. I think this is mostly the main problem. That is the capital account, and there is no provision, as far as I know, to get data for this item reported in the capital account. That is, sort of net capital formation, capital transfer, and obviously, residential investment, which is really important also for the story of the so-called super multiplier. And so maybe one can use some micro data. Speaking of the super multipliers, and so yes, using some micro data for CIS to input some data maybe, and But I think, the real problem also really starts when, once you compute the so-called net lending and net borrowing position. Because it's true, again, you have you can derive the net saving, but, again, you really need the sort of the items from the net capital formation from the residual of the capital account to get, to this, the net lending and net borrowing position for each of these quantile. Then when you get okay, maybe as pointed out by Mark, you can do the opposite, like starting from the financial account. But again, you find another issue. You have to say here. I mean, that is, it's true you can get sort of the net worth from each quantile, so taking basically the difference between sort of the asset and liabilities. But here you miss out on the nominal, the nominal gains, capital gains, basically, and other changes. What you can do is derive an aggregate measure of the valuation, maybe taking the difference between net worth and net saving. But you can enter into details of the the financial, the sort of financial tools. And and then if you want to dig even further, and then sort of mention the idea, one can also ask to mention the idea of the sort of how to account for household production. And again, VIA has some sort of which usually does lead to an appropriation in the income expenditure data. The VIA does publish a satellite account that estimates the value of production by household, though they do not account for unpaid non-market help received from person not residing in the household and home production by household member by household member, which is a research that other colleagues, other distinguished colleagues, really has done in very recently, complementing some BLS data. So ultimately, where do you allocate some of this data into the household sector or the financial sector? So I will stop here, and then I'll thank you for your attention, and I'll look forward to question, comments, and the discussion by you.
Thank you. Well, perfectly, actually saved 5 minutes. So Mark Morgan is discussant.
Yeah. It's okay.
Thank you, Giuliano, for the paper.